The year was 1969. Deep in Soviet design bureaus, engineers drew the first lines of what would become one of the most mass-produced tanks in modern history, the T-72. But what they created wasn't built to protect. It was built to multiply. This was not a tank born from compassion. It was born from doctrine, from the blood-soaked lessons of World War II, where Soviet success had come not from superior equipment, but from overwhelming numbers. The T-34 had proven it. Soviet armor didn't need to be the best, only everywhere. And so, the T-72 followed in that brutal legacy. Faster to build, easier to train, cheaper to replace. Each machine held 3 men and 22 rounds of high-explosive ammunition beneath their feet. A tank designed for war, not for survival. Unlike Western models like the American Abrams or the German Leopard, which prioritized crew safety with armored ammo compartments and blowout panels, the T-72 ignored such luxuries. In Soviet strategy, the tank was the weapon. The crew, replaceable. This cold calculation manifested in every detail of its construction. Instead of a human loader, it used an autoloader, a mechanical carousel that spun beneath the crew's seats, feeding shells into the 125mm gun every 7 seconds. But this carousel was also a trap. If an enemy shell penetrated the armor and struck the ammo ring, the result was instant. An overpressure blast that turned the turret into a missile, launching it into the air, leaving nothing behind but fire and silence. Crews came to fear this fate. They gave it a name, the Jack-in-the-Box effect. And yet, the T-72 kept rolling off the assembly lines, over 25,000 built, deployed in wars from Chechnya to Iraq, from Syria to Ukraine. To the outside world, it looked like a fearsome machine. But for the men inside, it was a coffin welded shut. This is the story of the T-72, its origins, its failures, and the hidden toll it took on those who climbed inside. The steel, the fire, and the silence that always came after. From the start, the T-72 was a product of fear, fear of falling behind, fear of being outnumbered, fear of being invaded again. So Soviet planners turned to cold efficiency. Why train 4 men when 3 would do? Why teach careful loading when an autoloader could jam a shell into the breech in seconds? Why armor the crew when the tank itself was the priority? The answer was simple. Wars, the Soviets believed, were won not with caution, but with speed, mass, and sacrifice. Inside the T-72, the crew, commander, gunner, and driver, sat shoulder to shoulder, knees pressed against machinery. The air was always thick, oil, sweat, gunmetal. Under their feet a carousel spun silently, holding 22 shells of high explosive. Each round a ticking time bomb. The turret was cramped, barely allowing space to move. In training, recruits quickly learned to fear the autoloader. It didn't hesitate. If your arm was in the wrong place, the mechanism would take. No warnings, no pause. They called it the meat grinder. Still, the T-72's design seemed brilliant on paper. It was fast, lethal, cheap to produce, and it gave the Red Army numbers that NATO could only watch with unease. But survivability? That was never in the blueprints. Unlike the American Abrams, which vented exploding ammo through blowout panels, the T-72 kept its ammunition where it was easiest to access, even if that meant putting it under the crew's boots. One hit in the wrong spot and the tank became a furnace. Soviet manuals didn't talk much about this. They talked about mobility, fire rate, crossing rivers, but not about what happened when an RPG struck from the side or when a shell came in low and hit the carousel. Veterans knew, though. They knew that if the carousel ignited, there would be no rescue, no climbing out, no shouting on the radio, just milliseconds of light and pressure, then nothing. In war zones from the Caucasus to the Middle East, the T-72 became infamous, not for its victories, but for its failures. Each burned-out hull left behind a warning written in smoke. This wasn't just a tank. It was a trap, and thousands of men would walk into it. December 31st, 1994. Grozny, Chechnya. Russian tank columns rolled into the city under gray winter skies. Rows of T-72s and T-80 moved through narrow streets, their steel tracks echoing off shattered apartment blocks. Soldiers believed it would be a show of strength, a swift victory to close out the year. Instead, they rolled into a trap. Chechen fighters waited in the ruins, rooftops, basements, alleyways. RPG teams hid behind broken concrete, letting the tanks pass before they attacked. First the front, then the rear. The convoy was boxed in. T-72s spun their turrets wildly, searching for targets. But in Grozny's close quarters, they couldn't aim high enough to hit the rooftops or low enough for basements. They were blind, exposed, and then the shells found their mark. One by one, the tanks exploded, not small fires, catastrophic eruptions. Flames burst through hatches, turrets shot into the air, some flipping, some landing hundreds of feet away. The jack-in-the-box effect was no longer theory. It was everywhere. Russian infantry radioed for help. None came. Inside one T-72, 21-year-old conscript Mikhail Baranov felt the hit before he heard it. He remembered a flash, a roar. Then he was on the ground outside, thrown from the driver's hatch by force. His commander and gunner, gone, vaporized. He was the only survivor. Nearby, another crew tried to climb out of a burning tank. A machine gun opened fire. The gunner fell halfway through the hatch. The fire took the rest. By nightfall, dozens of tanks were smoldering husks. Turrets lay scattered like gravestones across Grozny streets. The survivors called it the tank cemetery. And it wasn't just Chechnya. Years earlier, in 1991, during Operation Desert Storm, USM-1 Abrams tanks met Iraqi T-72s in the open desert. The result? A slaughter. Abrams tanks struck from miles away. Iraqi crews never saw the shots coming. When they did, it was too late. One hit, sometimes two, and the T-72s exploded in fireballs. Turrets flew through the desert air like artillery shells. The flaw was always the same: the carousel, the ammunition, the cost, and the men inside. The T-72 wasn't just failing, it was executing its own. The battlefield had changed, the tank had not. Surviving a T-72 explosion wasn't victory, it was a sentence. For the rare few who crawled out of a burning hull, the war never truly ended. Burned flesh, crushed limbs, skin melted to steel. But worse, far worse, were the ghosts they carried. Mikhail Baranov, the young driver thrown from his tank in Grozny, never fought again. He spent months in a Moscow hospital. Doctors rebuilt his face, grafted skin to his arms, but they couldn't touch the nights. "I heard their voices for years," he once said. Not screams, just silence, that silence when they died. And he was lucky. Others came home with no hands, severed by the autoloader during combat, or half blind from the pressure wave that followed a turret blast. Some tried to return to life, most couldn't, because the wounds the T-72 left behind weren't just physical. They were deep, quiet, hidden. Russian veterans from Chechnya reported high rates of suicide. Many never spoke of the war again. Families described men who sat in dark rooms for hours, who couldn't ride in elevators, who woke up screaming, drenched in sweat, gasping for air. And it wasn't just Russia. Iraqi tankers who faced the Abrams in 1991 spoke of the same terror. Some deserted before the fighting began. Others begged to be reassigned. They knew what was coming. They knew their tanks would not save them. In Ukraine today, that fear is filmed in real time. Drone footage shows Russian and even Ukrainian T-72s struck by javelins or artillery. Turrets fly, smoke rises, and always no movement from inside. The silence that follows is the loudest truth. Even soldiers who survive speak in whispers. One Ukrainian tanker who drove a captured T-72 said, "Every mission, I thought, this is the one. I will not come back, not from the enemy, from the machine itself." Crews began welding makeshift cages to the tops of their tanks. Cope cages, they're called. Scrap metal, hopes of protection, but they rarely work, and everyone knows it. The T-72 does not forgive mistakes. It does not protect its crew. It asks them to sit atop ammunition and trust luck, and when luck runs out, there is only flash and ash. You can still find them today, scattered across the battlefields of Chechnya. buried in the deserts of Iraq, smoldering in the fields of Ukraine. T-72s, turrets torn off, hulls rusted, blackened by fire. Each one tells the same story, not just of defeat, but of design. The T-72 was meant to be a war machine, built, cheap, built fast, built in numbers that would overwhelm the West. And it did. For decades, NATO strategists feared the sight of Soviet tank armies pouring through the Fulda Gap. But the truth caught up. In Grozny, in Basra, in Donbass, every flaw was exposed. No blowout panels, no protected ammo racks, no escape. Just 3 men inside a steel shell, sitting on high explosives. Western tanks evolved, the Abrams, the Leopard, the Challenger, all adapted to protect the crew, even if the vehicle was lost. But the T-72 remained frozen in time. Upgraded optics, maybe, reactive armor bolted on, but the core flaw, the carousel, never changed, because the doctrine never changed. To the Soviet system, the crew was a means to an end. Their survival was optional. Their role? Temporary. And it's the crews who paid the price. Veterans from 5 decades of conflict carry scars the world cannot see. Some were thrown from hatches, some burned, some live with half their bodies intact, others with none of their brothers left. Families received medals, empty uniforms, promises, but not truth. And now, in the age of viral warfare, the world watches the T-72 fail in real time. Videos shared online show the instant before impact and the seconds after. Always the same: smoke, fire, silence. The Jack-in-the-Box is no longer a legend. It is a grim spectacle. What remains is a legacy stained not by defeat, but by abandonment. The T-72 wasn't a bad tank. It was a tank built for the wrong reasons and for the wrong war. Ask those who survived, and they won't speak of glory. They'll tell you about the silence, about the heat, about watching friends vanish in a flash they never saw coming. And when they look at the rusted wrecks still scattered across the earth, they don't see history. They see graves.